This video is sponsored by Card Market. Card Market is Europe's largest online marketplace for trading card games. There is no better place to fulfill all your Yu-Gi-Oh! And card game-based needs. The platform is not only exclusive to only Yu-Gi-Oh!, but also has sections for all other major card games. You can find a link to Card Market down below in the description. And now, without further ado, let's go into the video.
What's up, guys? This is going to be the third and final Drytron video. If you haven't seen the first two installments of this showing off kind of what these cards do and also some combos, I would recommend you check those out. Those are going to be in the description. Before I talk about the actual deck profile, I kind of want to briefly go over my thoughts on this deck and kind of its place in the meta. I think it's a very interesting combo deck with a lot of potential, but I think the format is a little too fast for it right now, which is an interesting thing to say when you look at its like boards, right? Like this deck is making like calamities plus negates on top of that. It's a very strong board. I think this deck's real strength is its grind game and the fact that it has, almost limitless resources coming from the graveyard after turn 3. And the fact is that you just aren't surviving past turn 1 against a lot of decks in the meta right now. So Virtual World will just make VFD and you lose. Dragon Link will just make their Buster Lock and their negates. Infernoble will hand rip you. The format is just really fast and it's hard to survive with a deck that really thrives past turn 1. I think if we get a ban list and the format slows down a bit, then this deck has a lot of potential. It has a really good Zoo matchup, in my opinion, because it just like deals with Zoo's disruption very well, and it just trades better than Zoo does. And there's potential builds that come to light if you have a slower format. You have builds involving cards like Amber Factor Pain, which get a lot more viable when cards like Calamities and Smoke Grenade don't exist in the format. My other thoughts are that this deck also has a problem in that its turn 1 boards are not as strong as some of the other boards in the meta, which again is kind of a ridiculous thing to say if you look at, it's making Calamities, right? But then, Virtual World is making double Calamities plus Chuche, and then Infernoble is literally hand looping you, and these decks have their own ways to play around side cards like Forbidden Droplet and like Dark Ruler no more. And this deck kind of lacks those resources. In particular, Droplet is really effective against, I think, almost every version of this deck, and it's just not really something you can reliably play around. So it's kind of a good thing that this deck does have these very, glaring drawbacks, because, I think it's a good thing that, you can't just create these ridiculous boards unpunished. There has to be some kind of weakness to exploit. But those are my thoughts. I think it's not as good as the current tier 1, but it has a lot of potential. And definitely, if we get a list, this deck very easily adapts to whatever is on the list, unless they ban a Drytron card, which is not a possibility. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. So this is the example deck profile I want to show off. This one is built to do the middle 2 combos in the longer section that kind of end on either a lone VFD if your hand is weak, or a VFD plus a Savage if your hand is pretty good and has that extender. It's built to do a lot of other stuff, and I'll kind of just show off the options in the extra deck. And after that, I'm going to talk about some potential options you have in the deck, especially ones that might persist going forward in a post-banless world. But let's just go over the ratios for now. I play only 4 of the level 1s. I don't play beta because I don't think it's necessary. We play 3 alpha, 3 zeta because they're the best. Zeta is kind of awkward because searching additional copies of Meteonis gets a little, it's not that useful after turn 1, but you do want to see this card turn 1 every time, and so I think it's important to max out on Zeta. And then Alpha is kind of a no-brainer because you want to see your rituals every time. The other 2 are 2 Gamma and 2 Delta, and the ratios are not really something that I think are set in stone. I think people are going to experiment with different ratios of this and how many total Drytrons you play. Just 10 total has felt good for me. And I like being able to play 2 of each of these because of the Chaos Valkyria play that I mentioned before. Although this particular list, I've actually cut Chaos Valkyria. But these ratios have in general just felt nice. And then you play 3 Orange Light. This is your Fairy Tuner for your 5 rocks combo. And then this is just also potentially a hand trap because you play a lot of fairies in this deck. And so sometimes you just draw Orange Light plus like a fairy and you can negate their Lulu or whatever when they go first, and it just wins you the game. So that's pretty nice. You play 3 because if you draw this card, you can just get a different fairy off of Benten. You can get like another Benten, or you can get Natasha or something. And so it's not really bad to draw this card, although you can break on it. But I mean, I just think you play 3 of this in this particular list. And then I play Dawn Knight for the Union Carrier combo. Manju, this one's kind of a weird one because you would think that you always want to summon Orange Light. Manju, I think, is important for when you go second because you just never really want to go fiber combo into like a board of set cards or a board of negates or whatever because they'll just negate your power cards and then you're dead. Whereas Manju, you can kind of navigate your way around board states and then either stick a Zeus on the field or go for cards like Natasha. And I think it's just much more flexible going second. And you can even search this card. If you go first, you can search this card for turn 3 as follow up. It's just, I think you should play one Manju in the main. Ben 10 is a 3 of at all times, no exceptions, especially in this build where you just want as many fairies as possible. And then I play the one Natasha for reasons that I covered earlier because this card is crazy. This card is just one of your best board breakers for just in general. If they mount a comeback and you have this card for turn 3, it's just, I think you just win the game every time. You just yoink their boss monsters. Against the Zoo deck in particular, Zeus is a lot of pressure typically, but if you just set up your Natasha, you can just take their Zeus and it wipes their board for them, or for you. And I think it's really good. I play only one of the boss monsters. I was on both at one point, but I wanted to slim down on as many Garnets as possible. And so I ended up keeping Quadrantis and cutting Draconids. And the reason I kept in Quadrantis is because it covers Spell Trap Hate, which is something this deck kind of lacks with its other monsters. You have cards like Natasha and your Calamities to shut down monsters. And so this card comes up more as kind of covering your weaknesses against backrow decks. And I think it's good to play at least one big Drytron monster because it just comes up that you need like fodder for your Minionus. And this is just 4k fodder, which is nice. It's fetchable off emergency, and this card is just very frustrating to out in longer games when you can stick this on the board, then it just floats to death and you wipe your back row, and it can be summoned more than once because you can just bring it back the next turn if it dies with Meteonus. And so that's the reason I play this. And then I play one of Sorovis. This is optional. You really don't need to play this, but I chose to because this is a prep target because it's level 7, and so you can add this off of prep. And this protects your combo from Imperm, which is something that Herald of Orange Light doesn't do. So if you go for your combo and you think you're safe and they Imperm your Fiber or your Auroradon, then you just kind of stop in your tracks. And you kind of don't want that. And so in good hands where you can prep for Sorovis, or if you like open Benten and then you can alpha for Sorovis, it just protects your combo from cards like Imperm. And this is minor utility against their matchups. Like you can negate like a Dryden with this or something. But definitely cuttable. I don't think you need to play this, but it's a nice card. And then consistency, you have 3 Cyber Emergency. This just adds anything in your deck, any Drytron in your deck pretty much. It's just, this is a no-brainer at 3. And then if they happen to negate it with a card like Herald of the Arclight or Borlode Savage Dragon, you can just add this back to your hand. And what's nice is that the discard is usually irrelevant because your Drytrons are the same in grave as they are in hand. And so if they ever negate the activation of this card for whatever reason, it's just a neg 1 for them pretty much. And then Fafnir, Nova, these cards are also kind of no-brainers. Nova is, you want to see Nova every hand, but sometimes you see multiples of this. But I think this card is too good to just not want to max out on all the searchers. And then you play the 1 Terra for the Fafnirs as well. I only play 1 Meteonus in this build. This is going to be another thing that kind of takes a while to get figured out, I think, because you could play, I think in standard lists, you would play 2 of this. But this VFD build that turbos at triggering of all calamities doesn't really ritual summon that much. And so you can kind of get away with 1 in this build, but you will kind of miss it for later turns where, like your Zeta does nothing because you already have your Meteonus. And I don't know. I think in this build, like you do want to trim as much fat as possible. And I don't think 2 is necessary in this build, but in other builds where you ritual summon more, I would definitely play 2. 3 prep. This is because you want to see fairies in your opening hand for Herald, and prep adds Benten, which is a fairy. And again, like I said, this also adds Sorovis. Funnily enough, I think prep is actually not an auto include in this deck. I specifically played in this build for Orange Light, and I think if your build is very Orange Light heavy, you should be playing triple prep. But I think as the deck develops, and maybe after a ban list when you don't have to play Fibrax stuff anymore, then you can make a real case for cutting cards like prep. Because this card is actually not as good as you think it is. You want to see Drytrons, and you don't really want to see these cards without Drytrons. And what happens is that you'll a lot of the times loop through all your Benten targets, and you won't need prep anymore. Like prep doesn't add anything good that Benten doesn't already get, and so you run into this issue where these preps are not doing as much for you as more Drytron names could be. and it's hard to explain. I think it's easier to understand once you've had some playtime with the deck. But the point is that like I think this card is good. I don't think this card is as good as Emergency. And in general, in this deck, you have to kind of make a choice on how many consistency cards to play because there's so many rotas for this deck that are viable. Like you could play Where Art Thou. This has any Drytron is level 1. This is totally viable. You could play cards like Jack in the Hand or whatever CCG name is. This card. This is another like really weird rota. This is also like playable in this deck. And it's just like there's so many consistency cards you can play, and you have to just cut some of them. And I think prep is actually not as clear cut of an inclusion as you might believe. But in this build, again, since we're very orange light focused, we want to play 3 prep. And then finally, Foolish. This is just rota for any Drytron, so you play Foolish and Terraforming for the field spell. And then finally, a set of Gamma and a Driver. This is your main hand trap for going second. Something that is very, very possible is you don't play these last 3 and you just play the 1 Gamma in the main. And you just summon this off Fiber. And you might be thinking, this is kind of stupid. Like, why would you ever do this if Gamma is just a totally free inclusion? And the reason is because Driver is level 6 and Driver is normal summonable. And what that means is that if you ever try to resolve Gamma on your own turn, like if they Ash your Nova and you Gamma them, then, that's not legal, but if they Ash your Emergency and then you Gamma, then you can't use any Drytron effects that entire turn because you've special summoned a Driver. And that is something that isn't really clear until you like play the deck. And it's suddenly a huge bummer because it means like, oh, now all your counterplay against Droll and them like ashing or negating your search cards is just gone because this Gamma is never live on your own turn. You just can't combo. Like you are not allowed to combo if you resolve Gamma. So that would be the case against playing the playset in the main. Like you would think that it's like a super easy include in the main, but it's just because you can't summon this Driver, it becomes a lot more frustrating. And so some people are just not playing the 2 Gamma and the Driver. They're just playing 1 copy of main deck Gamma and that's it. And they're just treating it as a total garnet, which it is. But personally, I think if you're playing the 1, you should just play the full set because this is good for going second in almost every matchup. And you can even side out the second 2 Gammas in the Driver if you want to go first. So this is this main deck, 40 cards. I don't think you have to say 40 for this deck, but you want it like a nice deck list for a YouTube video. And so I think this is just a pretty clean list to show off. In the extra, it looks weird. They're grouped by role. These first 8 cards are mandatory for the Auroradon combo, and so they're just all here. They're self-explanatory. You've seen their role in the combo, so I won't be going over them. Savage is for this particular build because you can easily add on a Savage to your Calamities, which I show in the 3rd advanced combo. And this card also randomly comes up in like weird simplified game states. Like sometimes a game will go to like turn 5, and you can just normal summon Herald and then virtual summon back Benton and then make a Savage, and it just wins the game for you. It's really weird, but this card definitely comes up a lot. Theoretically, also, if you get hit by a card like Lancia, which I don't think is a good side against this deck, but if you do get hit by Lancia, it means you can't banish cards for Trish. And you can actually instead end on like a Crocker Dragon plus Savage board pretty easily with Savage. And so I think this card just comes up a lot. It's weird, but it definitely is useful. And then I play Zeus and Nightingale. I showed this off as well. This is, I think it's very important to play Zeus in this deck. It's just very easy to make, and it's super potent going second. And the last couple of cards are utility. I play Access Code, Phoenix, Link Rainbow, and Union Carrier. So yeah, that about does it for the main and extra. And I'm going to talk about some options you have, which I've shown here in this side deck. Now to talk about some alternatives that you could play in this deck. A lot of these are going to be kind of alternatives to keep in mind for a potential ban list because, again, cards like BFD and pieces of this Fibrax Link Cross combo that have been everywhere these last couple of months are, prime contenders for cards that could get hit. And so these are some options that you will probably want to keep in mind for such a ban list. So one card is Curious. This card, I think, has a ton of potential in this deck because it can dump any Drytron, which just sets up your engine. And you can also dump any Ritual because Meteona summons back from Grave. And so being able to dump like a Herald of Ultimateness and then you can just bring it back is just very, very nice. And it basically turns the mill into effectively a Rhoda. Curious is very easily made because you have a bunch of light fairies and a bunch of light machines. And so typically all you need is get a 3rd light. So Link Cross is one example. You can also play like Cyframe Lambda or Land for Rinkus. or you can overlay into a card like Princess Bride. Yeah, a card like Sylvan Princess Bride. This is a rank 1 plant, and so this is another very easy way to get the Curious. And so this card is good, I think, for setting up your engine. Another use for it is actually going to be dumping a Floodgate with Nightmare Griffin, because you do end up with a lot of bodies in this deck, and so Griffin can very easily be made after you make a Curious. So you could dump like an Imperial Order, and then you could set it off of Griffin, and now you have protection against cards like Forbidden Droplet. So that's super nice. And there's a really, really cool and super janky combo where you dump and set Parthian Shot off of Curious Griffin, which is at the end of the battle phase, it becomes the end phase of this turn. You combo this with Armor Factor Pain, which is just a really awesome ritual that is seeing play in this deck, especially in the OCG, because their format is slower and it's filled with like Shaddoll and Zodiac. And this card says that your opponent skips your next main phase 1 if it's ritual summon. And so basically you skip their main phase 1, they go straight to battle phase. At the end of the battle phase, you activate Parthian Shot, and it skips their whole turn, which is hilarious. It also loses the Cosmic Cyclone, but I mean, what can you do about that, right? But I think this is just a fun option to keep in mind. Ember Factor is really cool in general. It also is just a floodgate for Fusion Synchro and Xyz monsters, and it's, I think, one of the coolest cards in this deck. It might see play in a slower format, or if, again, like this Halcross and this Calamity stuff gets hit and we can't use them anymore, and so something to keep in mind. Herald of the Archetype is another card. I showed off this card in the first combo where I made Herald into a Curious, and then I searched off of both Herald and Curious, and that's very, very cool. This card is also playable in this list. I would say this is maybe like the 16th or 17th best card in this extra deck, and so it didn't make the cut, but I think it's really good because it's just, you can make it for free during the Marcher combo. It pressures Nibiru, and then when you link it off, you can search for more ritual stuff, and I think that's quite important. And there's like weird like combos you can do where you can end on like a Herald Savage through a Lancia or through some other hand trap, and it has utility. So something to keep in mind for that as well. Chaos Ruler is another option. You would make this instead of Savage, and so that's mainly the reason I don't play it, is because I would rather just make a Savage. But this card's effect is, in theory, just crazy in this deck because you want your Drytrons in grave, you want generally your big rituals in grave, so you can bring them back with Meteonis. And so being able to just mill 5 and then excavate and add whatever card is best is very, very strong in this deck. And this is also just recurring fodder. You can bring it back. So this is just an option. Generally, I would prefer to make Savage, but this card is really good. Other options in terms of your kind of turn 1 combo boards, Vanity's Ruler is very popular, might be played TCG side as well. It's just a low commitment floodgate that can just win the game because it says your opponent cannot special summon monsters, and so that's super degenerate. And this is a light fairy, so it's searchable off Benten, and so what you can do is you will do your combos, you'll summon this early on, now you shut off Nibiru and Gamma, and then you can keep special summoning because this doesn't restrict you, only your opponent. And so you can do a board alongside your Vanity's Ruler. Practically, kind of the limitation of this card is that it's hard to set this card up before 5 summons, and it means that after that, they're just going to Nibiru you ASAP, so you don't have monsters to tribute for Vanity's Ruler. And it also competes with the normal summon with cards like Manju and Orange Light, and so it means that typically you have a harder time getting access to your actual engine, and sometimes your board is just Vanity's Ruler pass, which is kind of irritating because it loses to a lot of side cards, and it loses to like Virtual Ruler can just activate City, get Qinglong, negate your ruler, and then they just combo from there, and it is nothing. So yeah, there's some problems with this card, but it is a super viable win condition for this deck. Another one is kind of a no-brainer, but Red is Dark Dragoon. This deck makes a ton of monsters, and so Dragoon is very free to make. You can just make this with a Verte. These two cards in particular combo well together because Ruler will pressure out a Nibiru from them, and then you can just turn the token and like a Chaos Valkyria or something into Dragoon. Or you can like turn the token and like normal summon the Manju and then search more ritual stuff to make Dragoon. And so being able to end on like Dragoon plus Ruler is pretty common in a lot of hands, and you can just negate their outs to Ruler with Dragoon, which is pretty nice. And so that's another option I didn't show off. But Dragoon is super playable in this deck. You just do introduce kind of the problem of having more Garnets, but that is always a drawback of Dragoon, so what can you do? Some more fun tech options. Geonator Transverser is a card. This is one of the weirder ones. It's a newer link, and it says that you can switch control of two monsters that it points to. So your monster and your opponent's monster, you would just flip them. It doesn't target, so it does out Dragoon, and it also can't be destroyed while it's linked. So if they this will force out a Dragoon negate, and then you can just play from there. So a really funny thing about this card that a friend of mine pointed out is that if you play Relinquished Anima, which is super viable in this deck, and you play Geonator, then you actually cover 4 of their 5 muster zones with cards that just steal their cards. So that's kind of a funny option for removal. And then the other really funny option for Geonator is comboing with Blue Eyes Chaos Max. Chaos Max does double piercing battle damage, and so what you can do is you summon a Drytron with 0 defense to a zone that Geonator points to, and then you switch it with an opponent's monster, and then you smack the Drytron with Chaos Max for 8k damage exactly. It's a fun cheese option. Geonator is technically also removal, and so it's just another option you can play. There's plenty of weird things you can play with this deck, but this is one of the more common ones, so wanted to show that off. This is the rank 1 Towers bird I was talking about earlier. The name is Kikinagashi Fucho. It's just a generic rank 1. It is unaffected by other cards' effects, so it's a Towers. So if they have a bunch of spell traps that can disrupt your stuff, this is immune to all of it, and that's its niche over stuff like Nightingale. Because for example, you're playing into a Zoo board and they have a Zeus, and then this card's protection does nothing to Zeus, but this card would be immune to it. Or you play into a Zoo Eldritch board and they have a Dryden plus a Conquistador, and they use both to get rid of your Nightingale, and then you can't Zeus them anymore. Although this will trade into 2 disruptions, which is nice. But this card is just immune to all of that. The problem is that you have to attack, and so this card will die by that battle. You can't attach 2 materials, and it won't be destroyed by battle. So that is the idea here. If you need to attack into an attack position monster, ideally you will attack this into a defense position monster, and then you can just put a Zeus directly on top. Because the problem is if you have to attack an attack position monster, then it'll have no material, and then you need to summon Zeus over it, but the Zeus needs to have 2 materials, so you have to end up playing a Downward Magician instead. You have to put this on top of your Kikinagashi Fucho in main phase 2, and then you have to put the Zeus on top of the Downward. And so the problem with Fucho is that if they have a Trident, they'll just pop your Downward Magician, and then you can't Zeus. And so that's been my frustration with Fucho, and that's the reason I don't play this card, is because being forced to play Downward is, first of all, an extra deck slot, and then it also kind of goes against the whole point of playing a Towers if you can't guarantee the Zeus through it. But this is good. I think this is also going to be format dependent. If the format changes in a way that Nightingale becomes really bad, then you may be go back to playing this card or something. Yeah. As for other options in this deck, it is actually possible to play this deck with Extravagance. This is something a friend of mine introduced to me. You play the deck similarly to if any of you remember the Extravagance Spiral deck from I think earlier this year, early 2020. That just ended on Appaloosa plus a sleeper. This is a similar thing. You end on Appaloosa and a big ritual, so it could be a Draconids, or you could end on Herald of Ultimateness. And you just play a super bare bones extra deck with Curious, Appaloosa at 3s. You play I don't know, some other stuff that you think are necessary. And you just draw a bunch of cards and just have your engine access and just go for super conservative boards, and then just have a crazy grind after turn 3. So that's an option. Chaos Space is also an option in this deck. It's a little awkward, but you could play the Baby Dragons, for example, Wyver Burster and Collapse Serpent. And it gives you extra link fodder, and it gives you a draw 1, which is just nice. If you play Wyver Burster also, it's good in the Curious build, because Wyver Burster is a dragon, and you can just link it off your Curious. I tested Chaos Space myself, and my problem with it was that Wyver Burster was a brick a lot of the time. It's hard to get a dark in the graveyard, and so if you open the individual dragons without Chaos Space, then it's just not great for you. But this is playable. If you pitch a dark monster, you can add Benten, which is another kind of nice aspect of this. And you can also recycle your banished Bentens to just put more Bentens back in your deck, which is good for longer games. You can also, in theory, play Levianeer with this card and just use it to break boards. I don't think it's that great, but it's another, when I mentioned that this deck has 20 Rotas you could play, Chaos Space is kind of similar to that. This is just a totally viable consistency option that I don't think was going to end up being standard. And then finally, some hybrids you could play. I've seen Invoke Drytron running around. If this is your style, then feel free to go for it. The point is that you don't really care about your normal summon, and you're never special summoning Alistair, which is fine. So you just normal summon this, and you set up a Mechaba before your whole combo. And then because Mechaba is level 9, if you happen to go for the Calamities combo, you can do your combo, set up another negate alongside your Mechaba, and then you overlay the Mechaba for Calamities, and that's how you do that combo from there. And so that is an option you have. You could play this in a Purgatrio for closing out games, and just having like a recurring engine alongside your Drytrons to give you a lot of pressure. Downsides of this are, of course, like it clogs the main deck, and you also end up having to put a lot of cards in your extra, and so there's some downsides to Alistair, of course. Dogma cards are also viable because in this deck, after turn 1, you can switch to a more ritual-heavy style and just not care as much about summoning from the extra deck. And Dogma cards can dump Herald of the Arclight from your extra deck to your graveyard, which is just more consistency for you, and so you can end on, like your Punishment and like a Draconids and just play like a heavy ritual plus Dogma focused style. So that's a possibility in this deck as well. It goes without saying that I prefer the pure version. I think pure is just a lot better. But these are things I've seen running around, and they are viable. And the last card I want to talk about is not a TCG card. This is the Binder of the Heralds. It is an OCG exclusive, and there's no ETA when we get this card. It's kind of in import hell right now. It is basically a Manju that's a tuner, and is a level 2 fairy. So it's just a really crazy card overall. OCG has this card, and it turns all your combos like up a notch. It's really, really good. Unless you like, imagine like if you could summon a Manju and then go into Fiber combo, for example. That's basically what this card lets you do. And there's some really crazy stuff that people are doing where you like dump like a Herald, you make it level 6, you overlay it with a Benten for a Beatrice, and then you do other like absolutely crazy stuff. So this is a card to look out for. If we somehow get this imported in a side set or something in the next couple months, this is an easy inclusion in this deck. But until then, we are stuck with what we have TCG side, which at the moment is kind of just Fiber degeneracy. I know some of you are going to be kind of disappointed by the fact that I mainly showed off like Fiber link cross combos in this video, and that's understandable. I think we're all really sick of these cards at this point. But I think for the time being, this is the best way to play this deck, and there are so many other ways to play this deck that you absolutely don't have to play this. I really encourage you to just explore and figure out what you want to do. And in the hopes that, some or all of this stuff is addressed on the next ban list, I'll definitely be hoping to release some kind of follow-up video that goes into what I think are some of the more viable options going forward. But I covered some of my thoughts on those here. And yeah, I hope this was informative. Feel free to leave any questions you have about this deck in the comments. Like and subscribe. Check out our sponsors. Thanks for watching.